The UAP Herald, Case File 007, Astronauts and the Bogey. They are, arguably, the most carefully observed human beings who have ever lived, trained as test pilots and scientists, watched by doctors, by engineers, by 100 cameras and 1,000 sensors, every heartbeat logged, every word recorded. So when NASA astronauts, in orbit, on the way to the moon, standing on its surface, looked out the window and reported something they could not identify that ought to be the cleanest UFO testimony on Earth. In May of 2026, the Department of War put the tapes and the transcripts online. So we read them, all of them. And the honest answer is stranger than the legend, because most of the famous astronaut UFO chatter, read in full, has a mundane explanation sitting right there in the same transcript. Boosters, ice, debris, flashes inside the eye, but not all of it. Tonight, what the record actually says. November 1969. Apollo 12. Pete Conrad and Alan Bean are on the moon. Dick Gordon orbits overhead in the command module Yankee Clipper. Bean puts his eye to the alignment optical telescope, a precision navigation instrument, and looks into the dark quadrant of the lunar sky. And he starts narrating what he sees.
You can see these lights, particles of light, flashes of light just seem to come from. In this case, I'm looking in quadrant 1, which is the left one. It's coming from behind me, the left, and they're just sailing off in space. I was thinking they're dropping from my water boiler, but it looks like some of those things are escaping the moon. They really haul out of here and just press off at the stars.
Escaping the moon. It is one of the canonical NASA astronaut observations, time-stamped in the voice loop, heard live by Houston, who answers with a single Roger and no explanation. Now watch what credibility actually looks like, because the same 4 pages give us 2 more anomalies, and Apollo 12's own crew explains both of them away. A little later, Bean reports the abort guidance display pulsing, all 8s flashing once a second dimly on both registers. Spooky. Until Houston answers, they have seen that exact phenomenon during testing of nearly every spacecraft, back at the Grumman plant in Bethpage. It is electromagnetic interference. Solved. Then Conrad reports little bits and pieces floating along with us. Hardware or junk? The crew themselves land on the answer. It's debris and effluent moving with the spacecraft, lit by a tracking light, not a fleet. So in one document, you have the whole honest pattern. 2 anomalies the crew quietly closes. And 1, Bean's particles escaping the moon, that they never do, which brings us to the most misunderstood astronaut sighting of all, the lights they saw with their eyes closed. There's a second Apollo 12 tape in this release, not a flight loop, a post-mission medical debriefing. A clinician is walking the crew through the flashes of light they reported in space, and the framing on the tape is not, "Did you see a UFO?" It's clinical. The astronauts describe points and streaks of light. One says it was like, quote, "somebody was flashing a light at you, usually horizontal, traveling right to left, one crewman estimating about 30 degrees off the horizon." And here is the part the legend leaves out. The interviewer tells them exactly what this is part of: the search for cosmic rays, heavy nuclei passing through the body. He notes NASA had been chasing it since the Mercury program, trying to photograph it on the retina, and, quote, "we never could find any in there." In other words, the famous lights astronauts saw were, on this very tape, being investigated as a physiological phenomenon, cosmic ray particles registering as flashes inside the eye. Our own analysis is blunt about it. On this recording, no object is described as a craft. It is best characterized as a sensory anomaly under medical study. That phenomenon, by the way, turned out to be real science. Astronauts really do see cosmic ray light flashes. It just isn't a spaceship. So is it all boosters and biology? No. And the cleanest piece of the other side is the oldest one in the file, 1965. Gemini 7, Frank Borman and Jim Lovell. NASA Mission Control reintroduces a tape segment that had been lost. A communications line had failed between two buildings, and they'd had to dub it off the master. They wanted it on the record. And on it, the ground narrator does something careful. He sorts what the crew saw into 3 categories. There were particles, there was the booster, the spent rocket stage, a known object the crew could see. And then there was a third thing. Listen to how Mission Control labeled it.
There were several references to the bogey. This is the unidentified object in addition to the particles.
A bogey, distinct from the booster, distinct from the particles. The crew put it at roughly 3 to 4 miles, bearing about 2 o'clock. Our forensic audio analysis scored that tape 9 out of 10 for authenticity. The chain of custody framing, the radio discipline, the 3-object taxonomy are all consistent with the real 1965 procedure. We owe you the caveat because the channel lives on the caveats. The only transcript that exists is a machine transcription with audible artifacts. Borman's name comes out Mormon, Gemini comes out Jimny. The meaning is solid, the exact words are reconstructed, and then, 7 years later, the universe rhymes. Apollo 17, launch day, December 1972. A crewman watches a field of bright, jagged fragments drift past the window, sparkling, he says, like the 4th of July. A real anomaly? Maybe. Except the astronaut himself, on the tape, gives the answer.
My impression is that they're coming off the side of the S4B. They're flat, like vertical, some maybe 6 inches across. And I think for the most part, they're all moving away from us.
The S4B, the booster. Again, even the astronaut reaching for an explanation reaches for the rocket stage. That is the tension in the whole file, in 2 tapes 7 years apart. Gemini 7's mission control deliberately separated the bogey from the booster, and Apollo 17's crewman folded his fragments right back into it. Now the cold water, and there is a lot of it.
Read the orbital transcripts and a pattern jumps out. The swarms and fireflies that haunted the early missions are overwhelmingly ice and effluent. Frost sublimating off the hull, dumped water flash freezing in vacuum, paint flecks, debris drifting with the ship. The objects that pace the capsule are jettisoned panels and spent boosters tumbling on the same orbit. The pulsing instrument was interference, and the lights behind the eyelids were cosmic rays, not craft. Apollo's own crews said most of this out loud on the tape.
That is the honest weight of it. The overwhelming majority of astronaut UFO material, read in full, carries its own mundane explanation. What survives that filter is small, Bean's particles escaping the moon, and Gemini 7's bogey held apart from the booster. Unexplained is not the same word as extraterrestrial. It just means still open, which is exactly where the most serious document in this whole release comes in, and it isn't from NASA. Filed alongside the astronaut tapes is a 94-page report titled UFOs and Defense, What Should We Prepare For? The COMETA Report. It was written in 1999 by a French association of former senior officers, the chair, an Air Force General, Denis Letty, a preface by a former director of France's Institute for Advanced National Defense Studies, a foreword by a former chairman of the French Space Agency. These were not enthusiasts, and their method was conservative. They sorted thousands of cases into categories, and the one that mattered, Category D, the cases that stay unidentified despite abundant, high-quality data, came to just 4 to 5%. From that residue, they drew a careful conclusion.
The extraterrestrial hypothesis is by far the best scientific hypothesis. It certainly has not been categorically proven, but strong presumptions exist in its favor.
Has not been categorically proven. Senior defense officials choosing the extraterrestrial explanation as their leading hypothesis, and in the same breath refusing to call it a fact. That is the tone the evidence actually earns. But we flag two things, because the internet never does. First, COMETA was a private association. One handwritten note filed with the report says it outright. It is a private, not government report. It is not a French government finding. Second, it was a piece of advocacy hand-carried to a NASA official in 2001 inside a lobbying package. A package that included an Apollo astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, arguing the same case in the press.
Credible people, with credible jobs, were saying credible things about an uncredible subject, and asking, for once, to be taken seriously.
For the record, 1965, Gemini 7. Mission control logs a Bogey, distinct from the booster, at 3 to 4 miles. 1969, Apollo 12. Alan Bean reports particles of light escaping the moon. The crew explains away an instrument glitch and floating debris in the same breath. 1969, the medical tape. The astronauts' light flashes are studied as a cosmic ray phenomenon. 1972, Apollo 17. Bright fragments at the window, and the crewman names the S4B booster himself. 1999, COMETA. French defense officials call the extraterrestrial hypothesis the best one and admit it isn't proven. 2026, the Department of War puts all of it online. So, what do we actually know? We know astronauts reported unidentified things on the record in their own voices. We know that most of those reports, read in full, carry a mundane explanation the crews themselves often supplied. Boosters, ice, debris, interference, flashes inside the eye. We know a small residue does not, and never did, get a clean answer. And we know that the most credentialed study in the file landed on best hypothesis, not proven. What we don't know is what Bean's particles really were as they escaped the moon. We don't know what the Gemini 7 Bogey was, held 3 to 4 miles off and apart from the booster. And we don't know why so many serious people with so much to lose kept filing the same careful sentence for 60 years. We can't explain all of it. The astronaut UFO file is not a hanger of sources. It's better than that. It's a record of the most observed people alive, looking hard, describing exactly what they saw, and more often than not, talking themselves back down to the booster. The honest story isn't that astronauts saw aliens. It's that even they, with the best seats in the universe, were left with a few things they could not name. Case File 007. Astronauts and the Bogey. Every tape transcribed, every claim checked against the record by an autonomous AI investigation. The UAP Herald. Declassified. Investigated. Filed.